So, official welcome to JAWS and Citation Styles. Yes, someone did say Citation Styles. Gotta emphasize that. Put that in bold, okay? Um, we've been through our polled questions. We just including that slide. If you haven't answered those poll questions, they should still be up. So please make sure you answer those. 4, 5, and 6 are especially important for today. All right, so the format for our webinar today. The ground rules. The link to the handout is going to be in the chat. We'll emphasize that a lot. You'll probably see it multiple times. Questions in the chat, but a footnote for you is that the chat's going to be turned off periodically so Liz can demonstrate stuff with y'all. So when it's open, which will be during the time of the polls, we will absolutely, well, there's the first reference of it. You'll see that many times throughout the webinar. But we are going to get you that code here in a moment, but the chat's going to be on and off throughout the day. We do have 1.5 hours of ACV REP credit, and we do have captioning. All right. Our superstar joining us today, Elizabeth Whitaker from Vispero, technical writer. Just so you know, she is a bit under the weather, but that's not going to stop her today. And we knew that we couldn't have the webinar without her, so she's going to plow through it. Thanks for doing that, Liz. We appreciate it. Mike Wood is also here, Strategic Account Manager, Education from Vispero. So let's highlight some challenges today. Citation styles, we know they're visual in nature, which can make them difficult to deal with for students who are blind and visually impaired. For me, as a former blind student, I know they were an issue for me. And we didn't have all of the fun stuff and all the helpful stuff that we've got with JAWS today. So that was not available when I was a student. You also have confusion around the importance of these things. What purpose do they serve? Sometimes students are not motivated to learn these things. Why do I have to do this stuff? We have times when maybe students are excused from having to deal with these things because they're complex. But the fact is, as you get to higher education, it requires knowledge of these things. So it really is important if we can get students to understand them as much as possible. So our objectives, we've got several today. We're going to learn at least 5 keystrokes for formatting text, review 2 ways to check spelling, make sure we get that right, identify 2 keystrokes for checking formatting of all types, review 2 steps for centering a title, learn 2 ways to set the font size, and review 4 steps for creating a header.
All right, Paul, and before we get to reaching those learning objectives, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So I've ended polling. About 62 folks have voted, so thank you very much. We'll quickly review those before we get started with our fabulous presentation by Liz Whitaker today. Where are you from? The majority are joining us from various points across the United States. We do have a few international folks joining us today, so welcome, welcome. We hope this webinar is instructional and education for everyone. How did you learn about this webinar? Vast majority of folks are joining us based on an email from APH or from the APH website. Thank you for joining us, and make sure to share these webinars with your colleagues so that we can grow this service. What's your job title? 29% answered teacher of the visually impaired, but we do have a smattering of other folks joining us. For the question, what is your comfort level with JAWS? 50% said beginner, with only 2 responding that they're at the Jedi level. I know Elizabeth is going to have some really great suggestions for everyone on their path to learning JAWS. And as we learn citation styles, we're going to be learning a lot about formatting with JAWS. So really great information that's going to be applicable across a wide variety of usage points. In terms of what citation styles your students are using, again, 50% said APA, about 30% said MLA, 6% said other, and we did have 9 folks who said that students are excused due to formatting challenges. So hopefully we'll learn some really great tips, tricks, and techniques so that all students are able to use formatting. It's going to be so important as your students reach higher levels of academia to know how to format in a variety of styles. And finally, are your students using a refreshable Braille device to check formatting? 52% yes, 48% no. So about half. And we'll share with you some techniques for using that refreshable Braille device to check formatting for those of you who have students who are using those. So I'm going to go ahead and close the chat. We will open that back up as we launch polls, so you can ask Elizabeth questions. But I'm going to turn it back over to you now, Paul.
All right, thank you. So that is our last introductory slide. So with that, let's let Elizabeth get started.
All right, thanks, Paul. Thank you once again, APH, for having me. This is really exciting. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. So we have a lot to talk about. I will be demonstrating some things for you and, of course, answering your questions. So I'm not really going to delve into each style and the specifics of each style. What I really want to talk about today, I will be giving you some information, but what I really want to touch on today is how to teach your students, and if you're a student yourself, and if you're struggling with this, how to format those papers, how to actually know, how to bold something, italicize something, things like that. So let's talk a minute about what I'm going to cover today. We're going to start out with just kind of an overview of citation styles. I know, Betsy Ann, you touched on that as well, and that this is something that is probably, if not a little scary for people, it's something that people dread. It's something that you think, oh no, like Paul said, why do I have to do that? So we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. I'm going to tell you about formatting text, checking the spelling, setting the font, checking your formatting. We're going to talk about creating a header, or what's called a running head, because that is commonly used, and also creating a works cited page or reference list. They're called different things for different types of citation styles. And then finally, I'm going to give you a few tools that you can use, a few resources. There are a lot out there, so I'd like to share a few with you that I have found useful over the years. So let's talk about just a little overview of citation styles. Now, as has been already mentioned, the two of the most common are MLA and APA. And of course, there are a lot more out there, and they're used for different purposes, of course, different types of papers and different types of research. The main differences typically lie in how you, like whether there's a title page, for example, or and how that title page is formatted. The in-text citations, which is where you reference something that somebody wrote and then you have to cite that within the text. The reference pages at the end, once again. So MLA typically is used by humanities. APA for social sciences. There's also Chicago style, which is used in maybe history, anthropology, arts. And so you'll see a lot of crossover, though. There are others as well, but I've actually seen APA used in history. I've seen APA used in journalism. So it really just depends on the teacher or the professor and what you're doing, what project you're doing, and how they want you to do it. So talk a little bit about MLA, and then I'm going to say a few things here about why citation styles are important. So as someone who is a JAWS user myself, and as someone who's totally blind, you like I said before, you may think, why do I need to do this? Why is this important? Well, citation within a paper and citing sources properly gives the writer credibility. It shows that you did your homework, that you have this great idea for a paper, you have this thesis, you think, okay, I want to prove this particular thing. So you go out there and you do all this research and you find that, yeah, my research here is showing that this is true. But you can't just state that, of course. You have to cite where you got that information. So it gives you credibility as a writer, and it also makes the papers easier to read. If someone is looking through that research paper that you wrote and you make one specific point and they think, oh, I really like that, I want to know more about that aspect of this topic, they see that source, they can immediately flip to that reference list or that works cited page, and they will know where you got that information, and then they can go look it up. So it shows that you've taken the time to do that research, and it also just makes the paper very easy to read and very easy to scan. One thing that I would recommend, and this is just a tip that I'm going to pass on. This, may or may not work for everybody, but I always liked to put together my sources beforehand. That way I didn't have to worry about it afterward. So sit down with those user guides, those style guides, and figure out how to put those sources together, how to cite them, and then you don't have to worry about it. I also like to make up a document. When I was in grad school, I did this, of the most important things I needed to know for citation, because it will vary. Some teachers are going to require one specific rule, some teachers are going to require something else. So it's going to vary from one course to another, one teacher to another. So these style guides, while they provide this foundation, some of it, is just a suggestion that they give you. For example, they say use a legible font. Well, if you're blind, how do you know what a legible font is? You don't. So you have to ask people. But typically, for example, Times New Roman, that's a good one to use. Stick with the ones Times New Roman 12-point font, double spaced, things like that. So if you write those things down and create a document for yourself, a reference document, it's easier to teach, it's easier to learn as a student, it's easier to reference, you have something to go back to. So while you're putting together those different sources and all that information, if you put that together first, then you don't dread it so much afterwards. So there's just a little tip that I like to follow, but everyone's different in how they assimilate information and organize everything. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about MLA before I get into this demonstration. MLA stands for Modern Language Association. And like I said, it's mostly for like humanities. You cite literature, paintings, books, and they update these guides every few years. And so that's why I'm not going to get into too many specifics, because at any time these guides can be updated. Now, fortunately, like Paul was saying, historically, we did not have really great access to these guides. So, you would have a teacher would hand out a book. And if you're blind, you had to figure out, okay, what do I need from this book? I need to read this in Braille. I need to see this in front of me. I need to understand it. Now, fortunately, all of this stuff is available on the internet. And a lot of teachers, a lot of professors now are suggesting that, specific sources on the internet. So that serves two purposes. Number one, if you're blind, you can just go read this at leisure. You don't have to have someone read it to you. You can quickly find the information that you want. You can hear JAWS read it, and then you can also read it in Braille with that Braille display. So always refer to the latest style guide. And of course, some teachers may want you to use the last version. It's really going to be specific to the class, but you can also refer to the latest style guide for the most up-to-date information. APA is the American Psychological Association. Again, that's typically the social sciences. So you might use it for psychology. You're going to cite journals, technical reports. Like I said, I actually used it in journalism classes. And once again, you're going to have those style guides that you're going to refer to, those most up-to-date style guides. All right, so is this a good time to see if anybody has any questions before we delve into formatting text?
Sure, we can do that, and we can put up our next poll question.
Will do.
And correct me wrong, are we asking the one now about the pairings?
Yes.
All right, let me get there to that. All right, so pick the correct pairing. Your choices are MLA, Works Cited, APA Reference List, or MLA Reference List, APA Works Cited. Pick the correct pairing. MLA Works Cited, APA Reference List, or MLA Reference List, APA Works Cited.
And the chat is open. Feel free to drop any questions so far in the chat. We have about 25% participation in this check-in poll. All right. About 40% have voted. The answer seems split. About 65% say it's the option number 1, MLA Works Cited, an APA reference list. About 40% say MLA reference list and APA Works Cited. So in a moment, we'll close the poll. And I'll turn it back to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. So we will now move on. Unfortunately, I had the slides a little out of order, but I got it back together now. So Liz?
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about formatting text, guys. So when you write a research paper, of course, you have to set your margins, you have to indent your text, and then you have to do a lot of other formatting things like italicize certain things, titles of things, underline, and things like that. So how do you do that with JAWS? Well, there are a couple ways, and just to let you guys know, I'm going to be demonstrating this from Microsoft Word because that's a commonly used application for writing research papers. Now, I don't know what your students are using. Feel free to let me know if they would use Word or if they would use Google Docs or something else. Let me know, because Word does have a lot of keyboard commands here. There are a lot of ways to format things. So, of course, your attributes are going to include bold, italic, underlined, or underline and line spacing. There are others, but those are the most common. I'm also going to show you, I'm going to throw in here how to perform a word count, because that can be very important. So all citation styles are going to require something specific. For example, like I said, MLA and APA, typically they recommend a legible font, but I've always heard and I've always used 12-point Times New Roman. So we're going to talk about that as well and how to do that. Double space and 1-inch margins all around. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to show you guys. We're going to start with setting the margins on all sides. Now, fortunately, some of this stuff is already the default. So that makes it easier when it's a default, but I'm going to show you how to get to it anyway.
Started screen share.
Okay, can you guys
Elizabeth Whitaker final.
see my screen and hear JAWS?
Elizabeth Whitaker.
Yep, hear it.
All right, great. So what I have up here is just an example of a research paper that I wrote several years ago, but it does have some of the things that we're going to cover today. All right, so setting margins, you're going to press Alt, the letter P, followed by M. So I'm going to do that right now.
Upper ribbon, tab collapsed. P. Lower M, margins list box, normal margins button selected.
Okay, so I pressed Alt by itself, I pressed P, and then I pressed the letter M. And what I have here is a margins dialog. And of course, this is from the ribbon. So I have the margins dialog. And in this drop down, it said normal, which is one margin on the top, the bottom, the left, and the right.
From Betsy Huggins to everyone, the correct response is MLA. Works.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press enter on normal.
Leaving menus, leaving ribbons, Elizabeth Whitaker, final paper, docs, Word.
Now, what if I want to know if that actually worked? Let's go back into and see what we have here. Let's press Alt,
Upper ribbon,
P,
P,
M.
lower ribbon, M, margins list box, normal margins button selected.
Now, JAWS lets us know that's selected and it said list box. If I want to navigate around this list box, I'm going to press down arrow.
Narrow margins button, moderate margins button, wide margins button, mirrored margins button.
We have a bunch of different options here.
Normal margins button selected.
But JAWS says it's selected, so I know that that is the one that we have here that's chosen. See, if I down arrow,
narrow margins button.
JAWS didn't say that was selected.
Normal margins button selected.
But it did say that normal margins are. So I'm going to press escape a couple times to get out of this.
Escape menu, escape, leaving menus, tab Elizabeth Whitaker, escape, leaving menus, leaving ribbons, edit.
All right, sometimes you have to press escape a few times to get out of the ribbons. So that's important to remember. Otherwise, sometimes you get hung up in that little cycle of you're still kind of in it and you're just, navigating around. Okay, indenting text. Now, this is something that I learned because typically, of course, the first line of a paragraph needs to be indented, right? So it usually needs to be indented 1/2 inch from the left margin. Now, JAWS is going to say, and I'll show you what happens here in just a second. I'm going to start a new document for this. So I'm going to press Control and the letter N for new.
Control N. Document one word. Print view. Edit.
All right. So I didn't even maximize this.
Menu.
Maximize
System
this to make sure you guys can see.
Edit.
Okay. So what I had always done is I've always spaced in 5 times because I was told, well, that's usually a typical indentation, right? However, they recommend that you do not do that because even though you're spacing in the same number of times for each paragraph, it can throw the spacing off. Now, JAWS will read a lot of this formatting. As you'll see later on, we're going to talk about that. But sometimes when things are slightly off, as a JAWS user, you may not know that. You might be able to tell more of that if you're using a Braille display, but then again, sometimes not. Sometimes things look a certain way and you're not necessarily going to get that feedback from JAWS. And I'm going to talk a little more about that and what to do about that, what I recommend. But they actually specify, for example, in the MLA style guide, they recommend pressing tab. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to show you what it says.
1.51 inches.
All right, it says 1.51 inches, but so it's going to tab in 1/2 inch, but it's going to say 1.5 because your margins are in whole inch, all around. But so every time you want to type the start of a new paragraph, you just tab and then you start typing.
Period. Space.
And then I'm trying to make a mistake. I think it's going to actually correct my mistake here, but this is important for what we're about to do. All right. So if I wanted, I just pressed enter. If I wanted to start a new paragraph, again, tab.
1.51 inches.
And I'm indented again. So we're just going to leave that there for now because I'm going to show you some other things here in just a second. So you can go into the paragraph settings under the ribbon and you can, work with those tab stops, but usually you do not need to because by default, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a 1/2 inch when you tab. So once again, like I said, I like to use that space method, but it's really not recommended. So I would highly recommend if students are writing a research paper, go ahead and use those tabs. Now, there are ways to quickly format text using the keyboard. So before you use these formatting commands, And this is something that's not obvious. You have to sometimes try it in order to know this. But in order to do things like bold, italics, underline, you have to select the text that you want to bold. You can, for example, if you're typing a title, you can go ahead and turn bold on, type that title, and press enter. That works, but what I have found sometimes with Word is that sometimes bold will stay on, or whatever you're using will stay on, and you won't realize it until you've typed maybe, a couple paragraphs and everything's bolded. And you go to check your formatting, and now you've got to figure out how much of this is bolded. You have to read each line, select each line, turn the bold off, and things like that. So that is a way to do it. You can format first. However, with some of these toggle things like bold, is the same command to turn it on as you do turn it off, italicize, underline, things like that. Sometimes you might want to try afterward, because if you select the text and then you apply the formatting, yes, there can still be some run over, but you're more likely going to get exactly what you're looking for there. So I'm going to go up to the top. I'm going to press Control Home.
Top of file.
And I'm going to type my name
ELZABETH
and press Enter.
Enter.
Now, let's see if my tab stopped.
Elizabeth, I am hosting a web home. Blank. Tab.
It did. Okay. And it tells you, see, I can right arrow.
Blank. Tab. Tab.
Left arrow. And it tells me tab. Okay.
Elizabeth.
So let's say I want to center or bold or italicize or underline. All right. So there are a few ways to select text. If you're selecting an entire document, you're going to press Control A. If you are selecting a line, if you have just one line to select, I would recommend using Shift and the End key, E-N-D. And if you're selecting more than one line, you can do Shift down arrow. You can select a word at a time with Control Shift right arrow, and a letter or character at a time with Shift right arrow. So these commands mirror the reading commands. So for example, if I want to read a line of text at a time, I can press up and down arrow, right? I can press down arrow.
I am hosting a webinar on citation styles. Blank.
And it said blank. I could press up arrow.
I am hosting a webinar on citations. Elizabeth.
I can press Control right arrow to read a word.
Blank. Tab. I am hosting.
Or Control left arrow to go backward.
Tab. Blank. Elizabeth.
Or I can press the right arrow key to go character.
LIZAB.
To the right, and then left
Bravo.
arrow.
AZILE.
To go back to the left. So
Echo.
all I'm doing is I'm adding Shift to these commands. So if I press Shift down arrow.
Selected. Elizabeth. Selected. I am hosting a webinar on citation styles. Period.
It says selected, and then it reads the line.
Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'm going to go back though. I can go to the beginning of a line with the Home key.
Home.
I can go to the end of the line with End.
End. Blank.
And then Control, if you add Control to those, Control Home goes to the top, Control End goes to the bottom of the file. But I'm going to go back to the beginning.
Home. E. Echo.
And I'm going to go ahead and press Control, I'm going to go ahead and press Shift End.
Selected. Elizabeth.
Okay, and it selected this line. So now I can do a number of things. I can press Control E for center.
Centered.
I can press Control B for bold.
Bold on. Bold on.
I can press Control U for underline.
Underline on. Underline on.
I don't know why it repeats everything, but I can also press Control I.
Italic on. Italic on.
For italic. Now, I don't want to do all that to this text, so I can also press those keys again to turn it off. Turn off italic. Control I.
Italic off. Italic off.
Control U for underline.
Underline off. Underline off.
And Control B for bold.
Bold off. Bold off.
But I'm going to leave this centered. Now, if you want to deselect text once you've selected it, any of the arrow keys will work.
Tab. Blank. Elizabeth.
All right. So we're going to talk about how to determine here in a minute whether or not your formatting has actually taken effect. So once again, just to kind of recap, you want to start by selecting your text. And then you want to apply the formatting command. So I like to use control, or I keep saying control, I apologize. I like to use shift end to select a line, because that way I know it's going to select just that line. I could also do shift down arrow. I can do control A for the whole document. And we're going to talk about when that's necessary. But then after you've selected that line, you can center with control E, you can bold with control B, underline with control U, and italicize with control I. And there, like I said, there are others as well that you can use, but these are just some pretty common keyboard commands that you can use to quickly format your text. Now, let's say you want to double space your document. That's when you're going to use control A to select the entire document. So I'm going to do that now.
Selected. Elizabeth, I am hosting a webinar on Citation Styles, period. This is a test to see if word misspelled will correct my misspelled Seepling, period.
Okay, good. I have some misspellings, which is what I wanted. All right. So now you're going to use, like, control 1 is single space, control 2 is double space, control 3 is triple. We want double. So we're going to press control 2.
Control 2.
All right. So JAWS doesn't say that's not a toggle. That's not one of those double space on, double space off. So we're going to rely on some reading commands here in just a minute to tell us whether or not that actually took effect. But select all with control A, press control 2 for double space. Now I'm going to press any of the arrow keys here just to deselect that text. All right, so I'm going to stop screen share. Let's see if you guys have
Elizabeth
any
Whitaker,
questions.
final paper, meeting controls. Meeting control, alt F.
Okay, Betsy Ann, let's put up our next poll question. And going along with what we just covered, what is the keyboard command to double space the document? Is it control 2, control shift 2, shift 2, or none of the above? So how do you double space your document? Control plus 2, control shift 2, shift plus 2, or none of the above. And it's also a good time to ask your questions about what we've covered so far. Or if you have a topic that you hope that we get to cover during the rest of the webinar.
The chat is open if you'd like to drop any questions in there. We'll keep a running log of those in case we don't get to your question immediately. Take another second to finish that check-in poll. Drop any questions in the chat. Looks like about 50% have voted. The majority are saying, what is the keyboard command to double space the document? 82% say control 2. So we'll give you just another minute to finish that check-in poll, and we'll reveal the answer in just a moment. All right, thank you guys for dropping your questions in the chat. We'll keep a running tab of those to make sure we get to as many as possible. And Paul, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Elizabeth.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk about checking the spelling of your document. And there are a few things that I definitely want to show you about this. And you may have heard JAWS mention just a minute ago that I had some misspelled words. So I'm going to kind of show you how to go in and turn that on. That's in the JAWS Settings Center. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Let's just start with that. And
Started task switching. Document 1 word.
all right,
Document
can you guys
1.
see my screen now?
Elizabeth. Meeting control. Mute.
Yes,
Arrow
yes, we
12.
get to your screen.
We hear you.
Okay, good. I was making sure I wasn't muted. Sorry.
Elizabeth.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to just read this line here and let's show you that what JAWS is going to say.
I am hosting a webinar on Citation Styles. This is a test to see if word misspelled will correct my misspelled Seepling.
All right, so as you heard, JAWS said misspelled. Now, there are a couple ways that you can get JAWS to recognize misspelled words. You can get JAWS to speak it. You can get JAWS to play a sound. So I'm going to show you where to go to do that. You go to the JAWS Settings Center, which if you go to the JAWS window, which mine started from the system tray, so I'm going to go to my desktop.
Windows M, desktop, folder view, list view, JAWS 2020.
But you go to the JAWS window,
Enter.
and
JAWS.
you go to Utilities.
Utility submenu.
With Alt-U.
Voice Assistant.
And then you press E for Settings Center.
EJ, leaving menus, folder view, list view, JAWS 20.
So now that I'm in Settings Center, I can type spelling.
S-P-E-L-L-G. Detect spelling while navigating. 1 of 4 search results.
Okay, so we have some results here. We have
4 search results list box. Detect spelling while navigating. Same as spelled. Proofing text processing.
All right, so detect spelling while navigating, which is exactly what I was doing. I was arrowing and having JAWS read the line. So I'm going to press space to show you what your options are. You're going to change those with the space bar.
Space, play sound, 3 of 3.
I can set it to play sound.
Space, off, 1 of 3.
Off.
Space, same as spelled, 2 of 3.
Or same as spelled. Let's go ahead and switch it to play sound.
Space, play sound, 3 of 3.
Now let's down arrow and see what our other spelling options are here.
Detect spelling while typing not checked. Proofing text processing.
All right, so I have this unchecked, but if you want it to detect your spelling and play a sound when you misspell something while you're typing, you can do that. You can check this.
Space, checked.
I'm going to leave it unchecked though.
Space, not checked.
You just press the space bar once again.
Speak spelling error count not checked. Proofing text process.
So speak spelling error count. I have that unchecked, but once again, you can just arrow through
Underline
these.
spelling errors checked. Braille proofing text.
That's a Braille proofing text thing here. Let's see.
Underline spelling errors checked.
So if you're reading with a Braille display and you want it to underline the spelling errors, it will. So once again, you just arrow through these settings and you can make whatever choices that you want to make.
Read only. Apply button. Alt plus A.
And I'm going to go ahead and hit apply since I made a change here.
Space. 4 search results list box.
And then
search. Cancel but OK button.
I want to go to OK. I'm just pressing tab or shift tab to navigate through this dialog and space here on OK.
Space. Desktop.
All right, so now
document 1 word.
Let's go back to this document and read that line again.
Elizabeth, I am hosting a webinar on Citation Styles. This is a test to see if Word will correct my spelling.
Okay, so you heard that buzz noise. That is the noise that indicates that you've misspelled a word. So, all right, so
period.
Let's go back to the top of the document, Control Home.
Top of file, Elizabeth.
So I'm going to go ahead and launch spell check. Well, actually, no, let me show you this other one first because I want to actually change some things in spell check. So JAWS has there's another feature, and this is specific to JAWS as well, where you can navigate through the misspelled words in a document using what we call quick nav keys. Quick nav keys, when we turn them on, they allow you to use letters to do certain things rather than typing the letter in your document, because if I were to press the letter M right now, of course it would type an M. But if I turn those quick keys on, it will take it out of typing mode and allow me to use certain letters like H. If there were headings in the document, I could quickly navigate this document with the letter H for headings like heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3, and so forth. But even more relevant in this situation, I can navigate through the misspelled words in my document. So how do I do that? All right, you're going to turn on those quick keys with the keyboard command Insert Z, Zulu. Insert Z. That's a toggle. That's another toggle. You do the same thing to turn it on as you do to turn it off. So you press Insert Z.
Quick keys on.
Right? Quick keys on. I do it again.
Quick keys off.
Quick keys off. So I'm going to turn it on.
Quick keys on.
Now, if I type the letter, I can navigate like I normally do, right? I can use my up and down arrow keys. But if I type the letter M, rather than typing the M, if I press M.
Will, W-I-L. This is a test to see if Word will correct my spelling.
All right. So it read that misspelled word, and then it read the sentence. And then I could press the letter M again.
Spelling, S-E-P-L-I-N-G. This is a test to see if Word will correct my spelling.
Now, if I want to fix those words, which I can do, I would have to turn quick keys off and then fix each word, which I'm going to go ahead and turn quick keys off.
Quick keys off.
All right. Another spell check trick here,
Elizabeth, I am
is that you can actually right click on a misspelled word to see if you get some correction here, which I'm going to show you how to do. I'm going to navigate to that first misspelled word, which is the word will.
I am hosting.
I'm pressing Control right arrow.
A web on site style period. This is a test to see if word will.
Okay, and there we hit that misspelled word. So now I can press Shift F10 or the applications key.
Applications menu, looking for suggestions, unavailable. G, leaving menus.
All right, so Word usually says that, it'll say unavailable, but when it says looking for suggestions, you know that it found misspelling. So I can up and down arrow here.
Wild, similar. Will, similar to. Determination, mind, desire, split button.
All right, now it didn't spell it for me. Let's see if this will work.
Will, W-I-L-L.
Okay, I just used a JAWS command, which is insert 5 on the number row. That will, if you press it once,
Will, comma, similar to colon, determination, comma.
it read the word. But if you hold down insert and press 5 twice quickly,
Will, W-I-L-L.
it'll spell it. Now, I'm not gonna, I could press enter if I wanted to correct this word here. Well, actually, yes, I will. I'll go ahead and do that. Press enter.
Document, one word, edit.
All right, so now let's read this sentence again.
Elizabeth, I am hosting a webinar on citation styles. This is a test to see if Word will correct my sequence.
All right, so it corrected the word will.
Will, I-W-I-L-L.
All right, and I can
Lima.
navigate here through that word using my arrow keys, left and right arrow keys, and I have the correct spelling. All right. So now let's talk about spelling and grammar check. You're going to press F7.
F7. Editor overview. 0 suggestions. Review all suggestions button. A.
All right, so that's typically what happens when you press F7. It's going to say editor review. It's going to allow you to review the suggestions, which I'm going to press the space bar. Sometimes it'll tell you how many suggestions. So I'll press space bar here.
Space. Spelling, not a dictionary. Sepling, S-E-P-L-I-N-G. No spelling suggestions. Original sentence, read only, edit. This is a test to see if Word will correct my sepling.
Okay. So now we have an entire dialogue. So if we had like grammar errors, spelling errors, we can tab through here, and there are various ways you can correct. So I'm going to let's just tab through this dialogue.
Read original sentence button.
So if I wanted to read the original sentence, I could press space.
Space.
This is a test to see if Word will correct my.
Okay, and it didn't read that last word. But you can also review that information. You heard JAWS say it. You can press insert B, which reads a dialog box, and Word, JAWS will repeat all of that it just read a minute ago. But if I keep tabbing through here.
Suggestions, spelling, similar to, meaning, bringing, predicting, 1 of 3, split button.
All right, so it said 1 of 3.
Sapling, similar to, tree, youth, seedling, 2 of 3,
That's
split button.
2 of 3. I'm down arrowing, by the way, to get through these suggestions.
Selling, similar to, vending, advertising, marketing.
All right, so I'm going to go back up to spelling.
Spelling, similar to, meaning, bringing, predicting, 1 of 3.
All right, and I can press, sometimes, now both of these sometimes will work. You can press C to change that spelling, to change it to the correct spelling, or Alt-C. Sometimes those Alt commands won't work, but typically you have Alt-G for ignore all, Alt-C or C for change, and then I or Alt-I for ignore once. So, if it's a word that you've spelled correctly and it's in your paper a whole lot and you want to ignore them all at the same time, then Word, once it encounters, if you choose ignore all, it won't tell you that word is misspelled when it encounters it again. So let's go ahead and press Alt-C.
Alt-C, editor overview, 1 suggestions, review all suggestions button. A.
And now it's back to the review all suggestions. If I press space.
Microsoft Word dialog. You have finished reviewing editor suggestions. OK button.
And it gives me a dialogue that I'm finished reviewing. I press space again.
Space, edit.
And I'm back in my document. So now, if I were to press F7 again.
F7, Microsoft Word dialog. You have finished reviewing editor suggestions. OK button. Space,
okay.
Edit.
So I get that same dialogue. So I've checked my spelling. It's correct. Now I'm just going to go down here because I want to show you how to get to settings in your Microsoft Word spell check here.
End, period.
So I'm going to go to the end.
Bottom of enter.
And I'm just going to misspell a word.
T-E-S-S.
No,
S.
I'll do that.
S.
All right. So we're going to go back. I'm going to press F7.
F7, editor.
And I'm going to tab.
Corrections card, refinements card, settings button.
To settings. Okay. And I'm going to press enter.
List box word options, proofing, 3 of 11.
Now there's so many different options here, but what we're really looking for is there's a box for check spelling as you type. So we're going to tab until we find that.
Proofing, auto, When correcting spelling in Microsoft Office programs, ignore words in uppercase check. Ignore words that contain numbers check. Ignore internet and flag repeated words. Enforce accented uppercase and suggest from main dictionary only checkbox not checked. Alt plus I. Custom dictionaries button. Alt plus C. French modes combo box. Spanish
There's a
modes
lot
combo
here.
box. When correcting spelling and grammar in Word. Mark grammar errors as you type checkbox checked. Alt
Okay,
plus M.
so we have mark grammar errors as you type, checkbox checked.
Frequently confused words check alt. Check
See,
spelling
I
as you
missed-
type checkbox checked.
Okay, I missed it. So check spelling as you type is checked.
Mark grammar errors as you type checkbox checked.
Mark grammar errors as you type is checked.
Frequently confused words checkbox checked. Alt.
Frequently confused. So you just have a lot of different options here. So really you can customize this however you want to. You just go in and choose your settings and then you tab to OK.
Check. Show writings. Settings. Reject. Exception. Hide.
Because there
OK.
are a
Cancel.
lot.
OK button.
And you just press the space bar on OK. But I'm going to go ahead and escape because I don't want to change anything.
Escape. Edit.
So that is how you use spell check. And there are just, like I said, a lot of options there. But once you set it up the way you want it, it'll stay that way.
Meeting control.
So I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any questions.
Okay.
Now.
All right, I'm going to open up the chat. So Elizabeth, did you say that you were ready for questions?
I am, absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to take it back to some questions that have been left in our chat. How important do you think it is for students to learn to explore the ribbon for formatting besides using the hotkeys?
I think it's important to understand the ribbon. Now, sometimes you have to dig for those hotkeys. Sometimes when you go, well, for example, and I'm going to show you guys how to do this in a few minutes. If you're creating a running head or something like that, you know, those hotkeys are not necessarily evident. But I will say that Microsoft does a good job of providing. So if I don't know a hotkey and I'm having trouble locating it in the ribbon, I'll go to Google and do a search, or I'll you know, access a keyboard command list or something. All of the commands, you know, that I've talked about today as far as accessing formatting are in the handout. So if you guys have any questions, definitely let us know about that. But yeah, I would say it's an important thing to, it's important to understand how the ribbon is laid out and how you navigate it.
Great. So you let us know how to make, to set line spacing at 1 spacing and 2 spacing. Is there an option for setting 1.5 line spacing?
You know, let me see something here. I want to see if, I want to see what happens if I use Control 3. I want to see what JAWS says. Didn't actually say, let's see. Okay, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think, none of the numbers I've tried. I know you can go in and do it in the menus, but yeah, that might be one of those settings for the menus.
It looks like some folks in our chat have shared that Control+5 will do 1.5 spacing.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Okay, let's.
Huh. So thanks to the folks who
That's
are
interesting,
responding
yeah.
in the chat.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that.
Great knowledge sharing.
And that did work, so thank you. Yeah. So yes, Control+5. Good to know.
Excellent. So for folks who are wondering, we're going to drop Elizabeth's handout in the chat again. It has a lot of these specific commands listed, which should answer a variety of questions. So if we want to keep going, Elizabeth, we can close the chat and save some more questions for the end.
Okay, great. All right, now
I've
we're going
got your slides ready.
Okay, thanks. We're going to talk about font. So there are a few different ways to set font. And, you know, as with anything else, there are probably several different ways of performing each of these tasks. So I definitely appreciate the tips that some of you are sharing that you may have. So that's definitely good to know. And there are lots of ways to perform tasks, and there's some that you may prefer over others. You know, you may have your own way of doing things, but you can set the font using the font dialog box. You can set it from the ribbon. You can change the font size using the keyboard. So, you know, there's just a lot of different ways to get to those font attributes. So before you set the font, and I'm going to share my screen here in just a minute and do this, you're going to, again, press Control A to select the entire document, and then Alt, then H, followed by F, and then F again. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, it's not letting me. Let's see. Let me try again.
There you go. Mine was still
Oh, that's
sharing.
fine. Yeah.
Started. Task switching. Document one
Okay.
word.
Can you guys see my screen here, Jaws?
Elizabeth. I am Elizabeth.
All right. So I'm going to press Control A.
Selected. Elizabeth, I am hosting a webinar.
Now, if you don't do this, if you don't select the document, it won't change your font. And that can be very frustrating, once again, if you're not sure, well, you know, why is this not changing? So you select the document with Control A, then I'm going to press Alt, then H, then F, then F.
Upper ribbon, ribbon H. Lower F. F. Home. Font edit combo collapsed. Delivery body. Alt followed by H.
Okay, so here I'm in this big font dialog box. It has a lot of settings, most of which you don't need for this anyway. So I'm in the font, the box where I can choose a specific font, and I want to choose Times New Roman. The easiest way, instead of arrowing through all these, you can press your up and down arrow key, but I'm going to press the letter T,
T.
and then I'm going to down arrow.
Team viewer 15 of Tempest and TH Serapin P. The hand black, the hand X, the hand light, the serif hand, the serif hand, the serif hand, the serif.
I could probably press TI. Let's try that.
I.
I was just going to ask you that, if you could
Yeah,
do that.
that first letter navigation is great.
Times New Roman.
And it worked. Okay, so Times New Roman. And so that's what I want. So I'm going to tab.
Font size edit combo collapsed. 11.
And Word used to default to 12-point Times New Roman. Now it's 11-point Calibri, I think. I'm going to press up arrow.
10. 9.
Or
10.
down arrow.
11. 12.
And I'm on 12. And I'm just going to go ahead and enter right here.
$14. 12.
That did not work.
11. 12.
Okay, so I'm going to tab.
Grow font button. Control. Shrink. Men.
To
Bold
okay.
button. Italic button. Not
So
checked.
you have a lot of things here. You can grow your font, shrink your font, bold,
Underline. Strike through button.
underline,
Subs. Super. Menu. Text highlight. Font color. Font dot dot. Paragraph.
color.
Bullets, numberings. Menu. Decrease it. Increase. Sort dot. Show all. Align left. Send. Align right.
Now,
Justify.
there is an easier way to do this I'm about to show you rather than having to tab.
Shadings. Borders. Paragraph.
Through all
Dot
of
dot dot.
this.
Sub menu. Styles. Dot
But
dot.
I just wanted to, especially with that question about the ribbon, I just wanted to show you.
Edit. Replace. Menu. Voice. Menu. Editor button. Pin the ribbon. Home. Clipboard.
All right, so
Cut button. Control.
as you can see, now we're kind of lost. So I'm going to press escape,
Escape. Leaving menu.
and
Leaving
I'm going
ribbon.
to show you
Edit.
an
Elizabeth.
easier
I
way
am
to do
hosting.
this.
Elizabeth.
But
12 points. Black on white. Times New Roman.
it actually did work. And I know that, and we're about to talk about this because I pressed Insert F. So it actually did work. What that command used to do is it used to take you back to your document. This time it didn't. All right, another way to get to the font dialog, and this is much easier. I'm going to press Control A.
Selected.
I'm going to press Control D, Delta.
Control D. Font. Font. Edit combo. Times New Roman. Times New Roman. Piss off.
And
Times New
here
Roman.
I am. And this is a much cleaner way to do it because here you are. You've got your font dialog. You can tab.
Font style. Edit combo. Regular.
Here you could choose regular,
Italic.
italic,
Bold. Bold italic.
bold, bold italic.
Bold italic.
We
Regular.
want regular
Size. Edit combo. 12.
and 12. And we really don't want to change the color, but you could.
Font color automatic button.
But we're not going to do that. But I'll shift tab back up to 12 point.
Size. Edit comp. Edit. Elizabeth. I am host.
And that brought me back to my document. So it's good to know where to find the font information. It's good to know where that is in the ribbon, but it's also good to know that Control D.
Elizabeth.
All right. I want to show you another interesting way to change the point size. And I learned this keyboard command just a few years ago, and I use it all the time. If you just want to change the point size, I'm going to Control A.
Selected. Elizabeth.
Now, I can hold down Control and Shift. I can press period
14 point. 14 point. 18 point.
to increase, or comma.
16 point. 14 point. 14 point.
Now, for whatever reason, it wants to repeat that,
E.
but I'm going to press Insert F, and let's see what it is.
12 point. Black on white. Times New Roman.
So there we have. We have 12-point Times New Roman. So let's see. Now, you heard JAWS saying a lot of things. We're going to talk about this here in just a second. But JAWS is going to announce what the font is, what the color is, what the point size is, the style.
12 point. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. Double. Paragraph formatting. Centered. Outline level. Body text.
Okay, it said that is centered.
I am hosting a webinar.
Let's see if this is centered.
12 point. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. Double. Paragraph formatting. Aligned left. Outline level. Body text.
So you got a lot of information. We're going to talk about this here in just a second. But you got a lot of information there about using, how to check your formatting. So let's see if you guys have any questions, and then we'll delve into checking formatting.
Meeting control. Stop share all day.
Right, I'm going to open back up the chat so folks can drop any questions they have in. All right. Elizabeth, there were some questions about what version of Windows you're using, what Word, if it's 365, and whether or not that matters when using some of the keystrokes that you've been sharing.
It does not. Well, okay, the version of Word might, but I don't think Microsoft has changed many of those. I'm using Windows 10 and I'm using Office 365.
Great, thank you.
And just to let you guys know, typically any of the commands I use where I say insert in something, that's a JAWS command. And then the others are just Windows or Word commands, something like that.
Great. So just to let folks know who are asking in the chat, yes, we are recording this session, and Elizabeth's fantastic handout with all of the specific commands she's mentioning, we'll drop that back in the chat as well to make sure everyone has access to these resources.
Elizabeth, can you use Control plus Shift plus P to change the point size?
You can. That will take you directly to the point size dialog.
Okay.
Yes. I used to use that one frequently, actually. That's a good idea.
And another question that just came in, when we check for formatting, is there a way to check for extra spaces or line breaks? This happens when copy pasting from PDF.
Right. I know spell check will flag extra spaces a lot of times. Line breaks, it may not flag that, but spell check will check for extra spaces. And now you can, one thing it will say, you could do a search, because sometimes those line breaks are vertical tabs, which is the shift of your backslash. So if you did a find, if you pressed Control F while you're in the Word document and you typed the shift of that backslash and it said vertical tab, then it might find all of those, and you could, if that's how they're noted, you could then get rid of them.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for answering those questions. Paul, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, and we're ready for your formatting.
All right, let's talk about checking formatting. This one's pretty quick. So I'm going to share my screen again here.
Start. Zoom. Zoom. You cannot task switching. Document one word. Document.
Okay, can you guys hear and see that?
Lang.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to go back to the top of this document.
From I am Elizabeth.
Now, to check your formatting, you're going to press Insert and the letter F as in Frank. And it's going to read all that information that you just heard a few minutes ago.
12 point. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. Double. Paragraph formatting. Centered. Outline level. Body text.
Okay. Now, a lot of times when I use that command, I might be looking for maybe 1, 2 things, something like that. But let's say that you really want to know and you really want to be able to read that information. You can do what's called virtualizing that information, which means you put it in the virtual viewer. You're going to press insert and the letter F twice quickly. So hold down insert, press F twice quickly. And if you're using a laptop, by the way, you can set JAWS to laptop mode, laptop layout, and then your caps lock key becomes your insert. So I'm going to hold down insert and F twice quickly.
Insertion point formatting 12 point.
Okay, so what we have here is what's called the virtual viewer, which is a little area that JAWS will pop that information into and you can review it with your arrow keys. So like I can go to the top with Control Home.
Insertion point formatting.
It says insertion point formatting, and now I can read each line at a time.
12 point. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Blank. Line spacing double. Blank. Paragraph formatting centered. Blank. Outline level body text. Blank. Press escape to close this message.
And then I can press escape when I'm done.
Escape. Elizabeth Ed.
So that's just a little tip on how you're going to check that type of formatting right there. So insert F will read the formatting to you, and then insert F twice quickly will virtualize it in the JAWS virtual viewer where you can read it 1 line at a time. And then you just press escape when you want to exit the virtual viewer. All right, so I'm gonna
Zoom.
back over here, and Paul, I'll go ahead and give it back to you for a second
Alt
and talk about a running head for just a minute.
Okay, and while we do that, let us put up the next poll question, Betsy Ann, and we can get the chat back open. So the question is if you press insert F, what will JAWS speak when checking formatting information? You can check all that apply. Font style, font size, paragraph formatting, font theme, font color, line spacing. Insert F. What information is JAWS going to give you? The font style, the font size, paragraph formatting, font theme, font color, or line spacing.
All right, the chat is open if you'd like to drop in any questions. We've had about 35% vote on our check-in poll, so continue to drop your answers in there or in the chat if you cannot access the poll. Elizabeth, there's been at least 2 folks asking how to insert a bullet for lists of items in a Word document. So that
Sure.
might be something we can answer while we're having people finish this poll.
Absolutely, you sure can. You can go to your home tab and go to paragraph formatting, and there you have bullets and numbers, and you can choose which type of bullet you want to insert. Another way I like to do it also, you can press Control Shift and the letter L will insert a bullet. And also, and this is kind of old school, but I sure like this too. Another good way to insert a bullet is using a character command. So you turn your num lock on so that the numpad is, numbers, not using as JAWS navigation. You turn num lock on and you hold down Alt and you type on the numpad 0149. So it's Alt 0149, and that inserts a bullet as well. So there's a couple ways there to do that,
And so I saw somebody suggested too, when all else fails, the old "what do you want to do" dialogue comes in handy.
Mm-hmm.
This is where Sharky can come in. Yeah.
To insert that?
I don't know if it can do that because it's not a JAWS command.
Yeah, you can't. It won't do that.
That
Not
would be
yet,
great.
anyway. Not yet, anyway. Who knows?
All right, so almost 50% of our attendees have voted on our check-in poll. If you press insert F, what will JAWS speak when checking formatting information? Elizabeth, what's the correct answer?
Well, Elizabeth, which of the following will it not find? Again, you're pressing insert F, so it'll identify font style, correct?
Elizabeth, I think your mic is off.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
We
Yes.
can.
Okay,
You're
sorry
back.
about that. Yes, it will identify the style.
All right, size,
Yes.
paragraph formatting,
As in, yeah, indentations and things like that. Indentions, yes.
all right. How about font theme?
How about font what? I'm sorry.
Font theme.
Oh, theme. No, it won't read that. It'll read those first three though.
How about font color?
Yes.
All right, and line spacing.
Yes.
So the only one that insert plus F will not read then is font theme. All right. Thank
That
you.
is correct.
All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of information that it reads there. And so I can see where that's hard to keep up with as you're navigating through. But sometimes you just need to know certain things. So you're just kind of listening as a JAWS user for those things.
Well,
All right,
thanks.
You want to continue on with create a header?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Ready to go.
All right. So creating a header, so you have what's called a running head. So you're going to insert your page numbers and create that header from the ribbon. And that is actually several different steps, but then you can verify that that formatting is correct and verify that that header appears on every page of your paper. So a header is often called a running head, and it is located at the top of the page. And it can include information such as the paper title, if you're using APA, or your last name, depending on the course, if you're using MLA, and a page number. Usually it always includes page number. And they're going to be formatted differently. For example, with MLA, everything is flush right. And with APA, that title is going to be flush left while your page number is flush right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we are going to create a header as if I'm going to do it like the MLA style. So let me go ahead and share.
Started screen. Zoom. Document one word.
All right. So can you guys see and hear that?
We hear it.
All right, great. Great. All right, so once again, these are going to be very specific to each teacher, each professor. Different people are going to want you to do it differently. But I'm going to go ahead
Elizabeth, I am hosting a
and
bottom
insert a couple of page breaks here by pressing Control Enter because I want to have multiple pages.
Control Enter, page 2. Control Enter, page 3.
All right, now I'm going to go back to the top of this page.
Page 1. Top.
All right, so you're going to press Alt, then N, and then H to access the header dialog. So Alt.
Upper ribbon, N, lower H. Header and footer toolbar. Header button drop down pressed as pop-up. Blank button. Leaving menus. Header list box. Built-in. Blank button.
Okay, so we're not going to create our own here. We're just going to use the built-in, and we're on blank. So I'm going to press Enter here on blank.
Selected. Left bracket. Type here. Right bracket. Document one word. Edit. Type here.
All right. Now here's where I could type, for example, my last name, but I'm not going to do that yet. We're going to go ahead and insert a page number. So you're going to press Alt N followed by N and then U. Alt N N U.
Upper ribbon. N. Low N. U. Menu. Leaving menus. Top of page. Sub menu. Alt followed by N. N U T.
Okay, then I'll press T for top of page.
T. Leaving menus. Top of page list box. Simple. Plain number 1 button.
And I'm going to press enter on plain number 1. Now, sometimes, for instance, if you're formatting a paper and that style requires you to start on page 2, then you would definitely want to make sure you're on page 2 and you would want to start numbering, with 2. But I'm going to go ahead and press enter here on plain number 1.
Document one word. Header. Edit.
Now the page number will be inserted at the top of the page, but we want to get it flush right. We want to make sure of that. So, but I want to go ahead now and add the header information. So I'm going to add my last name. I'm going to find this page number.
1, page field.
I'm going to go to the, see, and it told me page field. I'm going to left arrow.
Space out of field. 1, page space out
Okay.
of field.
And I'm going to type my name, my last name.
Whitaker.
And I'm going to press space because I want one space between my name and the number.
Space. Space. R. Space. Space. 1.
And I
page
have
space
2
out of field.
spaces, so I'm going to take one out, backspace.
Space. R. Space. 1, page field. Space out
All
of
right.
field.
So with MLA, you want to make sure that everything is flush right. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of my name here.
Home. W.
And I'm going
Whiskey.
to press Control right arrow to select my name and select that page number.
Whitaker. Space. Select 1. Selected.
And I'm going to press Control R for right justify.
Aligned right.
Okay. So,
W.
and I just press the left arrow to deselect that. So let's press it. Let's use this other command here, this insert F that we've been talking about, and see what it tells us.
11 point. Black on white. Calibri. Header style. Line spacing. Single paragraph formatting. Aligned right. Outline level. Body text.
All right. So it's aligned right. So that's good. That's what we want. Now, I'm going to press escape.
Escape.
Okay. So we're done with that. We've already created it. So now let's say that you want to verify that that's created, right? You want to know whether that heading took because it didn't say it was saved or anything like that. So I am going to press, I'm looking for the keyboard command, sorry about that. I'm going to press Alt N H E. Alt N H E. Alt.
Upper ribbon N. Lower H. Leaving menu E. Document 1 word. Edit header.
And that edits the header that we've just created. So now we're in the header.
Space. Whitaker. Space. 1.
I could press that insert F again.
11 point. Black on white. Calibri. Header style. Line spacing. Single paragraph formatting. Aligned right. Outline level. Body text.
Okay, so I heard aligned right. That's good. Now, the reason this is called a running head is because it appears on every page. So you do this once, and then for every page, that header is going to appear. So if I were to down arrow right now, I'm going to show you what happens.
Blank out of field. Blank footer.
Okay, there's the footer. We don't have a footer. We're not going to create one.
Whitaker 2. Header.
But it said Whitaker 2.
Blank. Blank footer. Whitaker 3. Header.
Whitaker 3.
Blank. Blank.
And that's all we have. So now we can up arrow.
Blank. Whitaker 3. Blank. Blank. Whitaker 2. Blank. Blank. Head. Whitaker 1.
And it announces my last name along with those page numbers. So I can hit escape.
Escape.
All right. So let's see if you guys have any
Task
questions
switching.
now.
Meeting
Or
controls.
do we want to go on to the final task, which is talking about the reference lists and the works cited pages?
Yep, we have one final poll question.
Okay.
Alt F.
Along with the chat, of course, throw your questions in there. Betsy Ann, let's throw up our last question. And we want to know, does JAWS check the heading style? Example, heading level 1. Yes or no? Does JAWS announce, or does JAWS check the heading style? For example, heading level 1. So yes or no?
All right. Chat is open, so drop any questions in there while you're finishing up the poll. We do have about 15 minutes left in this webinar today. We'll be providing the closing code at the end, right before we hit our end time of 1 p.m. Okay, a few more folks finishing up the poll, but at 41% voted, does JAWS check the heading style? Example, heading level 1. About 90% said yes, and 13% said no. So, Elizabeth, what was the correct response?
Correct response is yes. JAWS will announce those.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who keeps following along with this webinar before we head into the nitty-gritty of citation styles. All right, turning it back over to you, Paul.
All right, and let's move on to our next slide.
Okay.
Works cited.
So in MLA, they call it a works cited page, and then APA, it's a reference list. So I don't know what it's called in the other styles, but I know it can be called something different. No matter what it's called, typically speaking, when you create a reference list, you're going to put it in alphabetical order, and you're going to use what's called a hanging indent. Literally, it is the opposite of a paragraph. So the first line of that source, which might be your author's names, that first item is going to be flush left. Everything after that is going to be indented a ½ inch. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to show you very quickly how to create a hanging indent. Now these get a bit tricky sometimes because sometimes
So-
you get things that are indented and things that aren't.
Hey, Liz, you're not quite sharing your screen yet. There we
Zoom.
go.
There it
You
is.
do
Okay.
this. Document
Okay.
one word. Page.
Sorry about
Paste
that.
re-
All right.
Escape. Edit.
So-
Page. Blank. Piece. Allison.
I have pasted a source here that is from another paper. So we have this source,
Blank.
and on the first line we have
Piece. Allison. The Cambridge Companion to the Lighthouse. Cambridge.
the author and the title and
University Press. 2014. Web.
some information there and where that came from.
Blank.
So if I
Piece.
go to the first line here and I press Insert F,
12 points. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. Double. Paragraph formatting. Left indent of 0.5 inches. Align.
okay, actually I don't
Universe
really
piece,
want that
Alice.
indented, but let's see if I can unindent
Applica-
that. I'm going to
Escape. Blank. Piece. Selected. Justified.
left justify that.
Blank.
This is where some of this stuff gets tricky,
Piece.
and I'm going to tell you a tip here in just a second.
12 points. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. Double. Paragraph formatting. Left indent of 0.5 inch.
All right, well, it's still saying that.
Universe.
But typically speaking, what I like to do is I like to type out my sources.
Piece. Allison.
Actually,
Home.
maybe this will work.
Selected. Cut selection to clip. Alt Control V. Page 3. University Press. 20. Leaving menu is escape. University blank. Piece.
All right.
Paste recovery table. Paste escape.
Or it
Edit.
keeps wanting to tell me about pasting. So you go to the second line of your text here, of
University.
your source, and any line after that for that particular source, you're going to select that line,
Selected.
and then you're going to press Control T.
Hanging indent 1.5 inches.
And it's probably indented it more, quite possibly, than I wanted to, but Control T is the keyboard command. So you select from the second line on of each source, and then you press Control T.
Piece. Allison.
So if I were to press Insert F here,
12 points. Black on white. Times New Roman. Normal style. Line spacing. 1 lines. Paragraph formatting. Hanging indent of 0.5 inches. Left indent of 0.5 inches.
and it sounds like I have a left indent that I don't want, but that's where some of this stuff gets tricky because you'll get some information. It might look okay, or it might not look okay. So my recommendation for all of this stuff, if you're out there, if you're blind, if your students are, want to make sure their formatting is correct, have someone look at it. That's something that I always did, because you never know, one thing might be off slightly or misaligned, but that one thing can get you points counted off. So that's why it's really important. Use all of those tools available, but definitely have somebody check that. All right, so let's go back over here, and I think there's one more thing I want to talk to you guys about. I'm going to let you share your screen, Paul, and we'll talk about this last slide really quickly, because I want to share a couple tools with you guys. And again, there are a lot of other ways to format. There are a lot of other, things that you can do and that you may be required to do. So there are a lot of different resources out there. A couple of them I like to use, as far as there's a website called EasyBib, and it has a lot of information you can check to see if websites are credible. You can check the citation of different sources. You want to make sure you're citing something correctly. You can check it there. You can get a lot of information there. Another commonly used site for all of these different style guides is from Purdue University, the online writing lab at Purdue. You can access the APA style, MLA style. They give a lot of great information. It's all accessible with JAWS. They have examples. You can look at it with your Braille displays. So definitely feel free to check out, those sources as well. So, all right, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys to see if you have any questions.
Okay, so we can open the chat back up.
Okay, the chat is open once again, and I'm dropping in 2 links to resources that Liz talked about, EasyBib and OWL at Purdue. So those are 2 handy links.
Yeah, and there are a lot of others out there too that you guys may find that you like. So feel free to share those as well.
And I'm just going to speak to the whole having somebody look at it thing. As a grad student, pretty much everybody had their papers proofread by somebody. And it's not just for formatting, and it's not just the students that are blind. It's everybody pretty much did that. So it's not a blind thing. It's an everybody thing. Everybody should probably have their papers proofread. And this is just a little extra thing, but this kind of stuff can happen to everybody. So there's no reason to feel like you're different. Everybody should have their papers looked at and proofread.
That's true. Peer review is a very good thing because, when you write a paper, you're so close to that topic, you're so close to your own writing that, someone else could read that and make some really interesting suggestions, So yeah, I'm glad you made that point, Paul, because that's a really good point. And people who can see, they struggle with formatting too. So, like you said, it's not just from being blind. It just sometimes it can be so daunting. But the more you do it and the more you look at it, the easier it gets.
Liz, there's a question here that says, can we talk about creating sections? Let's see. Can we talk about creating sections for different header contents? Does that question translate to you? Again, can we talk about?
Completely understand the question.
Can we talk about creating sections for different header contents? Okay.
I mean, I know, if you're creating headers as in heading level 1, heading level 2, then you can select, if you want a heading level 1, you can select the text and press Alt Control 1 for heading level 1, Alt Control 2 for 2. But I may not be answering the actual question, so feel free to restate that.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. Are there plans to show typefaces such as bold and italics as one would see them in UEB for a Braille display user? If I'm not mistaken, the Braille displays will just indicate that there's some sort of formatting there, but not necessarily the specific type of formatting. Am I correct on that, or am I incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, that depends. Like the underline, it'll underline. You have certain markings. As far as like different font typefaces, I'm really not sure about that. I don't know. But you can, as a Braille user, you can also use Insert F
to get that information.
And if you want to virtualize it, for example, if you're not listening to speech, if you have speech turned off but you're using Braille, you press Insert F twice quickly and it virtualizes it in that JAWS virtual viewer, and then you can read what that font typeface is.
All right. Marty McKenzie has asked a couple of great questions. The first one I think he asked was, is it still necessary to double space after a period, or how important is it to double space after a period? And then he's added, is it still important to double space after closing punctuation marks? So any thoughts there, Liz?
Yes, actually, they have changed those rules. It's single space for the most part now. That's an excellent question because, when we all learned to type, we learned space twice after a period. But no, you space once. There may be some punctuation they want you to space twice after, like colons and things. But typically, if it's just a comma or period or quote, then you're going to space one time.
Okay. And then Juanita Hera, is the handout with the commands that are being covered in the chat, or will it be shared at the end? So yes, we've dropped links to Liz's handout in the chat. It was, I think, in an email that we sent out just an hour or so before, and then the follow-up email that we'll send to everybody will have a link to the handout. But if you're looking for the handout, if you went to the Access Academy page and you move down below the Access Academies that are on the horizon or in the future, you'll see a button that will take you to all of the Access Academy handouts. They're organized by month. So you'd see February, and then you'd see handouts for the Access Academy that have gone on in the month of February. So tell you what, why don't, Betsy Ann, why don't you move on to our discoveries? Paul, do you want to advance the slide, and then
There we go.
kick it to Mike?
Great. So we'll just quickly wrap up what we've learned during this fantastic webinar today. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your time with us.
Sure.
I know you're an incredibly valuable contributor, and people are always looking for more opportunities to hear from you. So what we learned today, formatting is possible for students who are blind or low vision. Though the context of learning the specific rules for formatting can be really challenging, it's super important as students progress to higher levels of academia to learn formatting and therefore learn keyboard shortcuts, keyboard commands, and other ways to format their work. While citation styles vary from APA to MLA to Chicago to Arabian, learning the fundamentals is going to be crucial for students to master any style they're met with, including some ornery old school professors who might prefer different ways of citing even standard MLA or APA text. And finally, there are resources available online. Elizabeth pointed to is EasyBib and Purdue OWL online writing lab, but there are plenty of others. Microsoft also has some access tools for formatting on its pages, so check those out as well. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about some products from APH and Vispero.
Sure thing. Thanks very much. So I just wanted to share with you all, you will be getting a follow-up email with a question. And in that email, you'll have links to the information here about the JAWS screen reader annual license, which is $90 annually. And that is with quota funds or without quota funds. And you can also purchase Zoom text for $80 annually. And in that email, there'll be links to both of these at APH, and also a question to answer. And if you answer that question correctly, you'll be entered into a drawing for a 1-year annual license of software for free.
Next slide, Paul.
And then the Jupyter. For those of you that are not familiar with the Jupyter, this is something we collaborated with APH on a couple years ago. It was the #1 quota product last year. And it is a portable video magnifier. It'll do distance, close up, and self-viewing, high definition camera, and that retails for $3,200, and that as well as quota and direct buy through APH. Thank you very much.
All right. And one last end note for one final APH product, that is Code Jumper. You may have heard that there's a new app out now for Android and Chromebook that works with Code Jumper. It is a tremendous tool for teaching basics of block coding. It is available on quota and non-quota. I believe it's $9.99 for non-quota buyers, $7.69, I believe, for quota. I should have looked the price up before we got started, but it is a tremendous thing using sound and other things to teach basic block coding concepts. And as I said, there's a new app for it on Android. Also, just a note about Jupyter. If you look right now on the website, it may say that it's on back order, but there's a new shipment that's coming in. And in the next few days, we'll have a whole new batch of Jupyters available. So don't worry. If you see that it's not available, it will be available shortly, probably within the next couple of days.
Great point there, Paul. Thanks.
No problem. So we absolutely appreciate you going through. This is a tough topic. Students struggle with this. I know as a former student, I did.